Hey, everybody. Welcome to Locker Room. This is Southland's podcast for men, where we read demons, conversations, talk about the right things in the right ways. My name is Scott Hatfield, as always. It always is.
It's always been your name as far as I know.
That's right.
Unless it's an alias.
It's my Christian name.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's my Christian name. Thanks for checking out the podcast. This podcast is all about creating a culture of godly men that fight for the most important things. And my guest today, you've already heard his voice. I already told you he was coming on back to back like the 90s Bulls, is a former wild man. We both came from a lot of brokenness, and I'll be honest, I'm grateful that we didn't know each other because we would have gotten in a lot of trouble. We'd have burned the city down.
Yeah, you would have been an older bad influence on me.
That's right. Your mom would have hated me.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
But God's done some rescuing, and we didn't have to share a small cell in juvie. The Holy Spirit's put a call in our lives, and we've gotten to serve at Southland a number of seasons. And it's been awesome. We've both been out west. I've run one marathon in my life. I don't know if I'll ever run another one, but the one that I ran was with this guy right here.
I'm good.
And what's funny is that you spend 5 months training, preparing for something. You get to know somebody.
Yeah.
20 weeks of running 5 days a week.
Yep.
In the blistering heat. God's done a really cool work in his life. Locker room, again, Scott Nickell.
What up?
How are you, buddy?
I'm good.
Good to have you, man. Thanks for jumping on. We kind of get in hard and heavy, so I thought it'd be fun just to kind of do some fun stuff. And so, as I mentioned that marathon, what do you remember about getting ready for the marathon, running that marathon?
A lot. A whole lot. We used to, we could say a lot about that. One is, this is way before we had phones that would track our mileage and stuff like that. So you wear those little Ironman watches and track your time and things like that. But we had to plot out our distances.
Drive it,
so we'd have to drive it the night before. So we had different routes. But as our training progressed, we'd be like, man, we need a 12-miler. Let's figure this one out. So I remember we would sometimes take turns plotting those out. And I was always of the mindset of man, we need some variety, lots of twists and turns. You were of the mindset of let's just run straight out and straight back.
You're right. I just want to know when we're 6 out and 6 back.
Dude, we ran past Keeneland one time or something because we'd meet at the old Gold's Gym at the Mill Pond Center.
That's right.
And we would go in there, put our stuff in the locker, and then we would go out there and run. I remember running through Shiloh Park a lot with you. I remember running down Man of War a lot with you. I remember one time, this is a men's podcast, so we can talk about this. You weren't with me. You missed a morning or something like that, but it was a shorter run. Yeah. But, man, I got into Shiloh Park, and it was pitch black, and I had to poop so bad, so bad. And so there's an area of Shiloh Park to this day that when I'm in it, I think, I had to go poop over there by that tree.
The grass is really green.
A lot of fertilizer.
I remember these. We did 220s before we got to the big race, and man, it was the race was in October, and man, it's so hot and the humidity is so bad. And I remember bleeding different spots on my chest. And, they got better stuff now that you can wear, but. We didn't have as much of that. And so, man. And
we were watching an episode of The Office the other day at home, and it was the one where they were doing the 5K for, I forget what they're fundraising for. And what's his name? Andy was bleeding. His nipples were bleeding real bad. And Eli was like, does that really happen to people? I was like, oh, yeah, man. It happens.
It happens. The race itself was in Chicago. Yep. And I don't know that we knew how good we had it because for the most part, it's pretty flat. People cheered all the time. I remember Jen Oakes telling us, I don't know if you remember this, but she was like, hey, make sure you put your name on your...
Yeah, people cheer for you.
People cheer for you. I thought that's the dumbest idea.
No, but when you're at mile 18 and somebody says, hey, Hatfield, or you're like, thank you.
Yeah, I know.
I love you, man.
I know. I remember somebody saying, woo, nice legs. You guys look sexy. And I was like,
thank you.
and so we and then you get into the city. And I remember it cooling off bad because the sun was shielded from the buildings and
get that lake effect and everything.
Gosh, man, it was so. I also remember some lady telling us, "Hey, you just got 3 more miles or whatever." And
she was a liar.
She was a liar. And I felt so angry.
That's right.
So angry. I hurt my knee at mile 11. So we did the walk run. We would run for 10. Walk for 1 minute.
Yeah.
And man, it was grueling. I remember one time You had to go to the bathroom.
Oh yeah.
And people are just peeing everywhere.
Yeah.
But I remember we were in this, I don't know, somewhere in the city, and I remember you getting kind of between these two, like, I don't know if they were duplexes or what, but you were trying to pee, and your legs were shaking, and you peed all over yourself.
Well, I was stretching.
Oh, is that what you're doing?
My hamstring or something. I was trying to stretch, and I accidentally peed
is that
myself.
what it was?
It's like I'm losing control of bodily functions. This is a miserable experience. Why does anybody do this?
People do this all the time, man. And people in front of us too. That you see people, and their shapes are the shapes are all different. But you see people that you're going,
how's that person ahead of me?
How are they ahead of me? They look like they just literally dusted off the Doritos from their chest, and they're running, and they're in front of us. It was wild. And then afterwards, at the end, we get done. They give us some kind of, I don't know, some kind of silver thing to kind of put around us, and then they hand us our medals.
Those rescue blanket things they give everybody.
Yeah, and they gave us medals, and so we had them, and so we were going to take the train back to the hotel, and the ladies were, our wives were going to go shopping, and we wanted them to hold the medals. You remember that?
Yeah.
And they were like, "No, we're going shopping."
We're not keeping those. Like
they were kind of heavy. I know. It's like,
I also remember we went to McDonald's, and grabbed all the worst possible food you could eat, and then did the thing they tell you not to do and sit in a hot tub.
I know. Why did we were so dumb?
Inflammation. The last thing you should do is sit in a hot tub. We're like, oh, it felt so good.
It did feel good.
And then the next day at the airport, you see people run this marathon can barely walk through the terminal.
That's right. All right. I'm going to take you back. What was your first concert? Do you remember?
Belle Biv DeVoe.
Dude.
Belle Biv DeVoe in Cincinnati, Ohio. Keith Sweat and Johnny Gill opened for him.
Buddy. That is so awesome.
I was 11. You should not have been at that concert.
Where were your parents?
My dad got me the tickets.
Of course he did.
He sent me with a cousin of his,
Belle Biv DeVoe.
Yeah.
Man. That girl is poison.
Yeah, and everybody's wearing the Just Do Me t-shirts.
Yeah. My first one was New Edition.
Yeah, same genre.
Shore,
That's the same
Salt and Pepper. Yeah. Dude.
Same genre.
It was awesome. It was awesome. There was like 3 white people in it, and that was one of them. It was great.
Yeah, it was good. At the old in Cincinnati, the old Riverfront Coliseum.
Yeah,
that's where the famous Who concert happened, where people died. They did the open seating, and they kept it all locked down. They opened it up, and then people trampled each other, and people died.
I love that, man. Belle Biv. I did not know that. That's awesome. That's awesome. Favorite movies growing up. Favorite movies.
Yeah, so all the Rocky stuff. So like Rocky IV on my birthday the other day.
Is Rocky IV your favorite of the Rockies?
No, actually it's not now, but then it was.
Yeah.
My favorite Rocky is actually Rocky I now.
Rocky I,
okay. Because I'm older and wiser and blah, blah, blah. But no, Rocky IV was great. And then Top Gun, man. We watched that. We watched Top Gun at my house the other day for my birthday, which, by the way, your birthday.
It's coming up.
It's coming. It's pretty soon.
Yeah.
Happy almost birthday.
It'll be this thing will drop. After
so happy birthday, Scott Hatfield.
Thanks, man.
But the kid, Allie made some food and we hung out, and they're like, "What do you want to do?" I was like, can we just watch a movie that was near and dear to my heart in my childhood?" And you got to be careful with those because a lot of those, But Top Gun was what we watched, and then I was flying back the other night, real late, getting back into Louisville from preaching somewhere, and Maverick was on my little headset in front of me. He's like, I'm going to watch Maverick.
Yeah, man. Tom Cruise, dude. Everybody wanted to fly a jet, and everybody wanted to ride a motorcycle, man.
Yeah, I wanted to be a pilot for a long time after watching Top Gun 100 times.
All right. Favorite music, favorite bands growing up?
Well, rap was...
I knew that would come out of your mouth first.
Rap was my... people say whatever you listen to between the ages of like 10 and 14 or something roughly like that is what you will always gravitate back towards. Yep. So that was one of the reasons that R&B, Belle Biv DeVoe, rap. So I was a big Tupac white kid,
man.
So it's funny at our front desk right now. Sarah Fain, our front desk people, they do a little survey every week, and the survey is East Coast, West Coast, Biggie or Tupac, and Tupac's losing right now, but he got my vote. So West Side,
absolutely. I'm with you. Favorite athlete growing up, one that you wanted to either be like or you just liked, UK player, maybe another, maybe a pro athlete, whatever.
Yeah, in the UK genre, Jamal Mashburn to me, because he was the first big recruit that Rick Pitino landed, and I was here as a kid watching that whole thing. Like he was unbelievable. He was so good. Unbelievable, and that was at a time where you didn't expect freshmen to come in and make an impact, and I remember the first time he took a three, yelling at the TV, going "No," and he made it, and oh, he can do this.
He can do that too.
So he was amazing. And then at the pro basketball level, I mean, Michael Jordan. Interestingly enough, my two favorite players growing up were Isaiah Thomas and Michael Jordan, who hated each other.
Right.
But man, I loved Isaiah Thomas. I loved how hard-nosed he was. I loved that he was a little guy that could just fill it up. I loved those Pistons teams.
I'm with you.
Yeah.
They're my favorite Pistons teams. Were, with all those guys with the fridge, with Sally, with Dennis Rodman, Mahorn. All those guys were tough.
Yeah, the bad boys.
Yeah, they were tough.
Yeah, I was a little bit I vividly remember watching Magic and Larry, but they were a little bit older when I really started watching.
Yeah.
So that '90s era was really when I started really getting into basketball and all that kind of stuff.
All right, here's a big question for you. Last time you as a man, felt like you were in a situation where something got heated and you thought this could go down in a bad way, that you might have to throw hands, and you mustered a lot of restraint because it could have ended up really, really bad.
I mean, a couple days ago.
Is that right?
Well, I've always said
you've told a story about being in Colorado when you were at, I think, a kids thing, and that I remember you telling me that. I remember hearing it. But anyway,
that was interesting. Eli was probably 4 or 5, and he was on a wrestling team, and we had to go out to Fort Lupton to wrestle, which is way out in eastern Colorado. And I thought we might have to fight our way out of the place. It was dicey. Wrestling meets can get really weird really fast.
Yeah.
A lot of emotions, lots of parents, lots of cultures colliding. But yeah, I've always said when I was younger, as a young dad, I said I will, if I ever get arrested, it will either be at a playground or airport. And it always makes people go, playground? Why? And that's because there have been numerous times where teenagers, older boys, things like that. Like one time we're riding their bikes through this little splash park area where my daughter, she was about 18 months old, maybe 2 years old. She's splashing around and they're riding their bikes through there, flying through, near her. And I was sitting there going, if they get any closer to her, I'm going to literally kill these two teenage boys. And
stomp a mud on
one of them went near enough to her that she kind of sat down real fast and sat back, and that was all I needed. And I find myself chasing these two teenage boys on bikes through my neighborhood, screaming at them, and it hit me, I don't know how far down the sidewalk, if you catch them, what are you going to do? Because this could get real bad real fast.
This is bad for business.
And then coming to my senses and going, I probably need to go back there and take care of my daughter who's still sitting in the splash park. But the other day I was at an airport. It was packed, and we're in this restaurant. I'm trying to watch the playoff game that's going on, and there's 2 or 3 people working, doing the best they can to get people their food and stuff. And this big old guy comes through, and he's screaming at this waitress, going, "Can I get a drink? Can I get a drink?" And she goes, "I'll get to you when I can." Then he starts screaming back at her, and I thought, man, this could get real interesting. This may be one of those viral videos, but I definitely have that in me to go. I don't want to. I've always said, you've always said, I feel like I got one good fight left in me. So it needs to be justified. Obviously, it needs to be justified to where if people read it in the paper, they would go, well, good for Nickell. We're glad he.
That's right.
We're glad he stood up for that person.
Does he need some bail money?
Yeah,
let's get him out of
But
there.
also, it needs to be a good fight. It needs to be a good challenge. So
absolutely, I love it. A funny story. So you've done children's and students, and you've preached for adults and young adults for a long time. You think of anything just that pops off the top of your head where you go, man, this is pretty funny?
I was telling this story the other day at Flatirons, where I was in Colorado. We had 6 services for a long time. So if you were preaching all 6 services, 2 Saturday night, 3 Sunday morning, 1 Sunday night. It was brutal.
Yeah.
The last one was always a college age service, which was fun. It was packed full of college age kids and things like that. But every year around Halloween, they would usually do something after. They'd have a big costume party or something. Well, none of the college age people ever thought this will be kind of weird to preach when you got people sitting out there in full costume. You're preaching 30, 40 minutes, and you've got, somebody who's dressed like Rambo over here. You've got a nurse over here. And it's Boulder. So people are wearing some weird stuff. And that was always challenging. Then one time I was preaching there, and this was just main services, normal Sunday morning. A dude came in wearing a full-on gorilla suit.
With the head and everything?
With the head and everything, and sat in the aisle, just house left, stage right in my line of sight. And the way we would enter back then is I would usually hang out in the lobby. I would walk to the sound booth, then I would walk down front, and then I would walk on stage during the service. Eventually, I'd make my way up stage.
Yeah.
So I saw this guy, and I was like, I don't know that I don't know I can do this sermon while I'm looking at a dude in a gorilla suit.
How do you not see that?
And there was no explanation. There was no reason. It wasn't Halloween. There's nothing. And so I told our safety team guys, I was like, hey, just tell him he's got to take that off.
Yeah.
Like, just tell him. And this dude got deeply offended, so mad at me that
just
I said,
looking for something.
I can't stand up here and preach to you while you're in a gorilla suit.
What do you mean I can't wear my gorilla suit in church?
Like, you're a distraction, man.
Yeah.
Stop it.
Yeah, go get some bananas. Get out of here.
Yeah.
It's 2024, and it's crazy how the years go fast. But for you personally, what are you excited about? Whether it's you personally or your family or even about our church, anything that sticks out to you?
Family, super excited. I've got one in college, another that's going to be headed that way soon. So my oldest son's trying to figure out where he's going to go and what he's going to do athletically and academically, and that's kind of a fun process and unknown. My daughter has a boyfriend that we really like, and so that's pretty fun.
Boy, that's good.
So that's pretty cool. And so family stuff, just new season that we're getting ready to enter into. We're going to have 2 boys still at the house, one in high school and one in upper elementary school. And so things are changing, and while there's some sadness around that, it's mostly excitement,
It's a mix.
but it's both. And here at church, man, we've already baptized 52 people this year. So I'm so excited about the way we continue to just see God pour out not only his blessings, but it seems that he's responding to our willingness to be really on mission with him and to keep in clear focus that we want to reach lost people. We've got some new initiatives that'll be coming that we'll be able to talk about more in this year at different campuses and things like that I'm really excited about. So I've never been more excited about the future of Southland and what God's doing.
Our staff are in a good place. Our campuses are in a good place. So thankful for what God's doing in Richmond, and got to spend some time there this past weekend, and it's fun, man. They're fired up about
new building, getting ready
about
to
what
be
God's
built.
going to do there and how he's going to use that. And it's so cool, man. Well, it's good stuff. We're in the middle of a series called Ethos of Godly Men, and it's been a lot of fun so far just digging out what that is, the culture, beliefs, values, actions of godly men. And so I want to kind of look at the spectrum of men that we see in our culture, and men are all over the place. I mean, there's a vast spectrum of men. We see men in arrested development, which means they just struggle to embrace maturity. We see men carry pain and woundedness that goes unaddressed, that impacts how they see themselves, how they live, how they lead, how they date, how they marry, how they parent. Men are extremely lonely today. They're surrounded by an ocean of men, but for all intents and purposes, they live on islands. They're all by themselves. And because of that, they live secret lives. They're wrapped up in drugs or alcohol, or they're wrapped up in depression, or they're wrapped up in a pornography addiction. They carry mountains of shame, but just keep going back to the same wells, hoping that things will be different. And on top of that, they're angry, unwilling, and unable to process the world around them and their emotional well-being. They become these ticking time bombs. It's not if, it's when they are going to blow up and lash out and lose control. And we see it online. We see it in our culture. We see it in marriages. We see it with their kids. The fallout is great. We see men stuck, too, unable to move, unable to get help, incapable of navigating life, relationships, marriage, parenting. We see men quit on the most important things. And the wake that is downstream is crushing to those that love them and need them. And the enemy's done a remarkable job of still kill and destroy. It's happening in the relationships and in their purpose and in their unique wiring, and it strips them of their God-given identity. And a lot of men are not leading; they're passive. They're not pursuing Jesus. They're not partnering with Him. They're not building. They're destroying. They're not healing. They're wounding. They're not intentional. They punt the ball when it comes to responsibility and ownership, neglecting their role as men to fight for the things that matter. So did I cover it all?
Yeah, you're getting there.
I mean,
almost, yeah.
Any of these areas, any of these things, or even other things stand out just as you look at the topography of men today?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really the expressions of it are super diverse and complicated. So all the things you listed and probably 10 other things we could list. Yeah. At the root of it, I think, is we have men who are all born asking the same question, and it's a fundamental question that is core to men's identity, and it's, am I enough?
Yeah.
And the problem is we take that fundamental question to all the wrong people to answer it.
Yeah.
And so that can show up in different ways, So if you are in a culture it feels like it's demonizing masculinity at every turn. So just because you're a man, you're evil, toxic masculinity, all these kind of things. In order to get affirmation from what feels like a world that's saying you've got to dial back your masculinity in order to get masculinity or to get affirmation.
Yeah.
I'll be passive. I'll be weak. I'll pander to you.
I'll stand up.
What do you want me to do? I'll do it. And so, but it's never enough. You're going, okay, I'm not enough for you even. I'm always playing catch up with you. So then the reaction could be, maybe I can swing over to this other side, the Andrew Tates of the world, and go, oh, you think all masculinity is toxic? Well, why do I care what you think? So how about I just dominate? Yeah. How about I just take over? How about I rule? How about I don't care what you think or what? Yeah. And so I'll prove that I'm enough because I've got this pantheon of, immature men over here who will cheer me on while I do it. And that's all I care about. And so, I mean, at the end of the day, when men are operating out of a deep insecurity because they've not taken that question, am I enough, to their heavenly Father and allowed him to answer the question, then we end up with all kinds of brokenness everywhere we go, and that's what you just walked through.
Yeah, we overcompensate, we run away from, we try to play a prove-it game, we operate out of our own flesh, out of our own strength. All those things, man. Well, today, just as we talk about this ethos, I thought it'd be interesting just to kind of do a deep dive on distinct actions of godly men. And this is certainly not an exhaustive list. We actually changed kind of the topic direction of this one. I kept thinking about it. I was working out, and I wrote down 30 things, and I was like, we won't get that today. So we're going to look at 4, but the reality is it's not about good intentions. It's not about empty promises or this waning motivation, because that doesn't last. It's not about something that we put these values on the wall or on some piece of paper. It's just paper, It's not about talking a big game. It's about our actions. It's about what we do. And so I wanted to center our time around some key actions that godly men pursue on a regular and consistent basis. And so, just to kick us off, we didn't just get the Bible. Jesus gave us a perfect picture of what it means to live from a God-honoring ethos. And John 1:14 says, the Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. And so we didn't just get the book. We got the living Logos. We don't just have the written word. We have the blueprint for what it means to be a godly man in our leader in King Jesus. And so when we read the Gospels, we're not just looking for what Jesus says or what he did. We want to look at how Jesus handles hard times and difficult people. We want to look at and see how Jesus responds and what he does and how he uses his words, his motivation, how he treats those who love him and those who hate him. We want to challenge you to pay attention to the rhythms that Jesus operates in. He spends a lot of time with the Father, and then he'll go back into the world to connect and love people and live on mission. And so there was a lot of purpose and passion, and that ethos drove him, not just in word, but in action. He didn't just talk a big game, he lived it. And so, Lockerman, when we open up God's Word, we should dig deeper and look longer and ponder with great intention our leader and our King Jesus. And so we want to capture what matters to him. We want to contemplate what angered him. We want to reflect on how he moves toward people and even toward the difficult places and difficult people and how he engages them. So don't go so narrow in what you're reading that you just see black letters on white pages. Investigate the story, meditate on what you see Jesus doing, and ask the Holy Spirit to help you apply what it is that you see him doing. And then let's emulate that and follow his example. And so we'll start with Paul. We'll look at a couple biblical leaders as it relates to this ethos and actions that they took. But I want to start with Paul and this specific action. The first action is be consumed with the gospel and remind yourself of your rescue story. Paul's story is so dramatic. A formerly Saul, a Pharisee, high religious, very influential. Jesus comes to earth on this rescue mission. And even though we don't see his name in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, he's somewhere in the backstory. of those Gospels. And the first time we do see Saul's name, it's at the death of a Christ follower named Stephen. And Stephen was this godly man, and he was arrested, and he's put on trial. And man, he stands with so much iron in his spine, and he speaks against it without fear.
Yeah.
Take my life. It's okay.
Yeah.
First Christian martyr, outside of Jesus. And in chapter, and so we see Paul there, he's a part of that, and he says, let's kill him, And then in chapter 9, Saul is going from town to town with a lot of vitriol and persecuting, threatening, imprisoning Christ's followers, pressuring them into recanting their belief in Jesus. And he's on the road to Damascus, and he has this encounter with God, with Jesus, and knocks him off his horse, and it changes his life, wholesale life change. He's baptized. God changes his name from Saul to Paul. And, it's interesting just looking at Paul's name in the Greek, and it's, there's a couple different iterations of this, but it looks like the word Paul means small. Mm-hmm. And my own thoughts of God's intentions or Jesus' intentions of doing this is that Saul thought he was a big deal.
Oh, yeah.
And now Paul knows that Jesus is a big deal, and he's been invited to play a small part in a gigantic redemptive story. And so here's what we find in Paul. He went from being consumed with destroying Christianity, the way, as they called it in the book of Acts, to being someone who heralded, who was consumed with sharing the gospel, starting churches, raising up leaders, mentoring young men, consumed with doctrine and sound teaching. He was literally Billy Graham long before there was ever a Billy Graham. And he's one of the most important Christian leaders that partnered with Jesus to create this movement of God in the first century, that his impact and his influence is still resounding in unprecedented ways. And he's written, close to or half of the New Testament. His writings are sacred and relevant to our lives today, and so relevant to men. But talk about the importance of Paul and his impact on your life. Because Paul, for me, if you said, hey, outside of Jesus, it's Paul. Mm-hmm. I love Paul.
Yeah, I love Paul. A lot of people struggle with Paul. He's really propositional. He's really bold, like you talked about. He pulls no punches. Like, if you really want to get to know Paul, go read his letter to the Galatian churches.
Yeah.
He's not afraid to call names and use harsh language and strong language.
Yeah.
He is unapologetic. He is the first into the fight. You're talking about a guy who got stoned, dragged outside a city, left for dead. Some think maybe he was actually dead and God resurrected him. We don't know.
Yeah.
But either way, when he came to, he marched right back into the city. Like, who does that?
Hey, I wasn't done.
Yeah, we see him in mob scenes where he's he's trying to go into the mob, into the crowd.
Yeah.
We see him challenge people constantly and consistently. But the thing that strikes me the most about Paul, and I said it in a sermon out of town this past weekend, I think Romans is the most powerful writing in all of Scripture, with the exception of Jesus' story of the prodigal son, which I think is the most powerful story ever told.
Yeah.
But man, especially when you read Romans chapter 5, 6, 7, and 8, it's amazing. And what you see Paul consistently and constantly doing is what I think he consistently and constantly had to do for himself, which is a reminder of the gospel.
Yeah.
If anybody could have ever been saved through their good works and their effort and their adherence to the law, it would have been someone like Paul.
Yeah.
And if anyone could have rested on their credentials in the Jewish community as a Pharisee, been trained by the most high-level teachers, it could have been him. But Paul, when Jesus changed his life, he knew beyond a shadow of a doubt it was not because of his own work. It was not because of his own effort. It was because of what Jesus had done. It was because of what grace had transformed him into. So he had experienced the transformative power of grace, not just the motivational power of law trying to do good works. And so he knew at the end of the day he was small. He knew at the end of the day he was insignificant. He knew at the end of the day, if anything, he was going to boast in his weaknesses, not his credentials. It was Christ in him and through him that changed everything. And so that gave him the boldness that he had in his new iteration as a follower of Jesus. And so, man, I love Paul. He's very logical, which works for my brain. Like I can track with him. I can follow him. I love the fact that he just shows such courage. I mean, when he goes through that laundry list of things that he's experienced,
we've Corinthians,
we've joked about it before. I'm beaten with rods, stoned, shipwrecked twice. It's like who gets on a boat after they've been floating a night and a day in the sea? Like, man, I'm good. I think I'll walk from here.
Yeah.
He just had been through it. So I've always tried to imagine, what did Paul look like before he was finally executed in Rome? I bet he didn't have any teeth.
Yeah.
They'd probably all been knocked out. The amount of scars.
He's getting up from bed.
Been flogged multiple times. His back had to just look gruesome. Walked all over the place, traveled all over the place. I mean, I bet he barely looked human. And so he just poured himself out, not to earn God's love or affection, but because he had God's love and affection. Yeah. And so men, I think it's important to learn that transformational work of grace will take you further, farther, faster than your own motivations to do good things ever will.
Yeah. I mean, it says, I consider all that loss or scubala, to knowing Christ.
Yep.
For me to live as Christ, to die is gain. Mm-hmm. I mean, over and over again, these 3 missionary journeys around the Mediterranean Rim and the churches that are started, the men that are raised up, the leaders that are put in place, and the mentoring that he does is powerful. He's consumed with the gospel. You've mentioned this, and it's in every book, every letter that he's written. And I just have a couple of these, but Romans 1:16 says, "For I'm not ashamed of the gospel, because it is the power of God that brings salvation to everyone who believes, first to the Jew and then to the Gentile." And then 1 Corinthians 1:18, "For the message of the cross is foolishness to those who are perishing, but to us who are being saved, it is the power of God." Mm-hmm. Galatians 1:11 and 12, "I want you to know, brothers and sisters, that the gospel I preach is not out of human origin. I did not receive it from any man, nor was I taught it. Rather, I received it by revelation from Jesus Christ." Colossians 1:21 and 22, "Once you were alienated from God and were enemies in your minds because of your evil behavior, but now he has reconciled you by Christ's physical body through death to present you holy in his sight, without blemish and free from accusation." And then, this 1 Timothy 1:15 and 16, it's just a summation of Paul's story, his conversion experiences. Here's a trustworthy saying that deserves full acceptance: "Christ came into the world to save sinners, of whom I am the worst. But for that very reason I was shown mercy, so that in me, the worst of sinners, Christ might display his immense patience as an example for those who would believe in him and receive eternal life." He opens his letters with grace and peace. He ends his letters that way. The gospel is never far from Paul's heart. It's never far from his lips. Knowing the gospel, reminding himself of the gospel, reminding himself of how Jesus rescued him is always on the front burner. And talk about why that's important for us as men to constantly be just soaking wet with the reminder of the gospel that saves us in our own rescue story.
Yeah, I mean, the enemy will get in your ear with accusation, and you will hear all the time, "You're not enough, you're a screw up, you're a failure, you're not qualified," right on down the list. And so when you can rest in your adoption as God's son, he loves you. There's nothing you could do to make him love you anymore, nothing you could do to make him love you any less. That's not on the table.
Yeah.
That, again, is so transformational that it will lead you to become a new kind of person who looks, loves, and lives a lot more like Jesus. It's when we start forgetting the gospel, forgetting that reality, that we tend to actually struggle more, because we're much more susceptible to the accusation of the enemy. So constantly reminding yourself of, I'm a child of God. I'm a child of the King. He's not withdrawing his love for me because I struggled today.
Yeah.
That's transformational. When I'm just trying to motivate myself out of my own sheer willpower to good works, I can accomplish that for a little while, but it won't last.
Eventually, all the water goes out of the cup.
That's right.
Yeah,
that's right.
That's right. A distinctive action of godly men are to remind themselves of the gospel and live daily, remember that Jesus is the hero in this story, and he's rescued us. So, Locker, we want to challenge you to keep the gospel front and center in your own life, and allow that story, your rescue story, his rescue story of us, to drive every area, every aspect. It keeps us humble. It reminds us that we're called to serve. It reminds that we should follow our leader and move toward the hard places and do the right things and love people the way Jesus did and Paul did. Here's another distinctive action. It's the second one, and I like this one. I think you'll like it too. But It's put away childhood and childish ways. There comes a time in our lives where we got to move from childhood to adulthood. We got to move from immaturity to maturity. We have to move from dependence on other people to being independent, from boyhood to manhood. And one of the key things that distinguishes this is the process of putting away childish things. And tucked inside of Paul's letter to the Corinthians, 1 Corinthians 13, this love chapter that we see a lot of love is this, love never fails, is this little verse that he drops in there, 1 Corinthians 13:11, which I thought was so cool. It says, when I was a child, I talked like a child, and I thought like a child, and I reasoned like a child. But when I became a man, I put childish ways behind me. And that's so much more than just going from being a dependent on your parents' W-2. It's so much more than you leaving from underneath their roof to having your own roof, whether that's an apartment or house. When we're launched into adulthood, college or a job, or you got to get yourself up, you got to cook your own meals, you got to pay your own bills, you got to create your own budget, you got to do your own chores, you got to make decisions for yourself. It's not just that. It's not just the process of becoming a fully functioning adult. It's about maturing toward biblical manhood and leaving puberty and the teenage years behind us. Paul is challenging men toward Christian maturity. And as we move toward maturity, everything changes. We take responsibility for our faith and for our relationship with Jesus. We have to decide, especially for kids who grown up in godly families, and thank God for them. We have to decide, is this going to be my faith or is it going to be my family's faith? And if it's going to be your family's faith eventually, and you'll put it on the back burner, and it'll just keep you in childish ways. And the ways of the kingdom are about moving toward maturity. And so we can't have both worlds. We must choose one, and God's hope is that we grow up and put childish ways behind us. And so talk about, when you hear putting childish ways behind us as men, why is that crucial for us?
Yeah, a couple things come to mind. The first is pursuing responsibility. So the distinction in growing in maturity from a boy to a man is taking on more and more responsibility. Yeah. And so if you're waiting till you turn 18, or you're waiting till you graduate college, or you're waiting till fill in the blank to then say, okay, then I'll be responsible. Yeah. That's not the way it works. Yeah. You've got to practice being responsible as you move towards maturity. And so I tell young guys all the time, like, look for ways to take responsibility now. Get a job when you're 14 so that when you're out of college, it's not a shock to your system to have a boss and have to be in on time and things like that.
It may be a sucky job.
Absolutely. Please go do one that's terrible. Everybody needs that. Even if it's not a job, take on responsibility at home. Don't wait to be told, Mom, what do you need me to do? Like, no, go. What needs to be done. Go do it. Or ask her what needs to be done, and then go do it. Make something your responsibility. Take on responsibility for things that are beyond your realm right now. Take on more weight and carry it. The way you get better at carrying heavy weights is by carrying heavy weights.
That's right.
So next week, you put 5 more pounds on than you did last week, and by the end of a year, you'll be shocked at how much you can carry. Yeah. That's true in every way, shape, and form, not just physically. So take on responsibility. And if you're an older man and you're going, actually, I've shirked responsibility. I've delegated responsibility. I'm not really taking responsibility for anything. You if you were looking in the mirror going, okay, I'm really out of shape. Yeah. I can't walk down the sidewalk, down the block without losing my breath. Right. What you would do is, if you wanted to change, is you would go, okay, I'll start walking to the end of the street, and then the day after that, I'll walk to the end of the street plus another 50 steps, and then eventually you can actually run a half marathon or whatever. If you find yourself right now going, man, I'm 45 and I've just shirked all the responsibility in my life, we'll start picking up responsibilities again, slowly but surely, and taking responsibility for your wife and your kids and your home and right on down the list. The other thing that comes to mind is childishness versus being childlike. So we see Jesus actually calling us to be like little children. But there's a big distinction between being immature and foolish, which is childish, and being trusting, which is what Jesus is pointing us to. So to have childlike trust in Jesus, that's not an immature thing. That's actually a mature thing. So it's interesting, as we see really wise and godly men grow, the older they get, the more childlike they become. It's really fascinating to watch. I've watched it with older men in my life. They actually become more joyful like a child. They actually become more trusting like a child. They actually become more hopeful like a child. But that's because of Jesus' work in their life. So those two things, responsibility and childlikeness as opposed to childishness.
That's excellent. It means putting old patterns and old ways behind us. It's one thing to see a 6-year-old in a grocery store lose their mind because they didn't get what they wanted, a candy bar, or whatever.
Yeah, it's a whole other thing when it's a guy in a restaurant in the Atlanta airport flipping out on the waitress and you're going,
we're going to drink it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like that it just, come on, man.
Yeah.
I mean, come on, man. There's a lot more going on other than what you think.
The world doesn't revolve around you.
It doesn't. And the Bible calls us as men to pursue spiritual maturity, to abide in Christ, to operate in our new life, and to wage war against the flesh, to walk in the Spirit, and to follow God's promptings. And Paul says it a number of times. I'll just give you a couple passages. You can respond to them. But Ephesians 4:22 through 23, it says, "You were taught with regard to your former way of life to put off your old self, which is being corrupted by its deceitful desires, and to be made new in the attitude of your minds, and to put on the new self, which is created to be like God in true righteousness and holiness." Talk about that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we see Paul have this it reads almost like a meltdown in Romans 7.
Yeah.
And he says, it's long. If you read it out loud, it really sounds like a meltdown. Things I want to do, I don't do. Things I don't want to do, the things I do. Yeah. At the end, it culminates with, man, I see this law at work within myself. When I want to do good, evil's right there beside me.
Yeah.
Now, who doesn't identify with that?
Yeah.
Like, man, this tension, this tug of war. And who will rescue me from this body of sin and death?
Right.
The wretched man that I am poses this question. Yeah. So who's going to save me? Like, I keep messing up. I really want to obey God, but I mess up,
That's right.
He answers his question not by saying, well, I'm going to try harder. I'm going to work myself to the bone.
Pull my bootstraps
I'm
up.
to read more rules. I'm going to put more systems in place. He says, thanks be to God through Jesus Christ our Lord. Yeah. So it takes us back to the original thing we talked about, which is reminding yourself of the gospel is so vital. And my grandfather, before he died, I remember one of the things he told me was, Scott, don't ever believe someone who tells you that the Christian life is always one day after another getting better and better and better and better. Some days are terrible, and you're not always progressively moving up and to the right.
That's right.
He said it's more like a battle. He's like, some days you'll take some ground and other days you'll be retreating. You'll get your tail handed to you. You'll be turned upside down, inside out, forwards and backwards. Yeah. It is not always upward and better. And so it's a battle, but at the end of the day, we can have confidence, and this is the Romans 8 thing, that we're more than conquerors through Christ who gives us, so
that's right.
At the end of the day, for me, it always comes back to I want to work really, really hard to serve Jesus, to serve my wife, to serve my kids, but I need to make sure that I'm not relying on my internal motivations because, again, that'll run out. I've got to rely on the transformative power of grace in my life. Yeah. There's a reason why that word power, the gospel, it's the power of God. Yeah. It's a word for dynamite in the New Testament. It's explosive. It's transformative. It turns things upside down and inside out.
And it's what empowers us.
Yes.
It's what empowers us. 2 Timothy 2:22 says, run from anything that stimulates youthful lust. Mm-hmm. Instead, pursue righteous living, faithfulness, love, and peace. Enjoy the companionship of those who call on the Lord with pure hearts.
Yeah, I think sometimes we forget to tell young men what to run to. We try, Paul does both there. Yeah. Run from youthful lust, run to. Yeah. So it's one thing to tell a young man, man, quit looking at porn. Okay, great ideas. Should definitely do that.
That's right.
Do you have any ideas on things I should do?
Yeah.
Because a young man might be able to muster the strength to not look at porn for about 15 minutes. Yeah. Yeah. But you've got to replace that with something else. And so I think that's a really key distinctive for young men. Instead of simply trying to just run away from the things that you've learned the hard way that are destructive, yes, definitely do that. But who and what are you running toward? Yeah. What are you going to be spending your time doing? What are you going to be filling up your mind with? What are you going to be putting your hand to? Who are you going to be spending time around? Yeah. And make sure all of those things line up with what Jesus says is good, true, beautiful, and best.
Yeah. That's awesome.
So, man, if you're going, man, I don't know why I keep messing up, but your Friday nights are all spent at bars, around a whole bunch of single people who are all looking for somebody to hook up with. Maybe changing where you're like, if you're trying to go, I'm going to go to the bar, but I'm not going to get drunk and I'm not going to take a stranger home. Yeah. Well, you might want to start with don't go to the bar on Friday night and go somewhere else,
Absolutely. The question for our men today is, what are some childish ways that you see in you? And maybe it's even going, you know what, I probably should bring that to a community of men to go, hey, man, do you see anything in me? Or this anger or just a resistance to truth or a resistance to do the right thing and obey. What are some? That's just being available to ask those things, because we may be holding on to childish ways and then out of those things going, hey, what do I need to replace that with? Yeah. What do I need to run towards?
I'll tell you what I do that I really struggle with is I'll pout. I think men will do this. They'll pout. If you don't get what you want when you want it at home, things aren't going the way that you wanted them to, you pout. And I do it all the time. And it becomes this, I actually have this little internal battle. Like, you're acting like you're pouting. You're acting like a big baby right now. Yeah. And you need to cut it out. You need to stop it. And I'll find myself still, doing it. And so what I've found is, if I can take a moment to recognize, all right, what am I mad about? What am I frustrated about? Do I need to go address this with Allie, or do I need to address this with the kids, or what is it? Yeah. Do I need to just let this go? Yeah. Take a breath. But what I ultimately have to do if I want to ditch that attitude is I have to go serve them. Yeah. So instead of looking for the next opportunity to say something sarcastic, like go unload the dishes, like go get the garbage cans, go clean up that space, set the table, go serve, go do something else that will switch my mentality from why I'm frustrated or whatever it is to how can I help. Yeah. That's a transformative. Now, I don't always do it perfectly, for sure. My family would tell you that, but
yeah. We put away childish ways and we pursue Jesus, and when we do that, we're pursuing His truth, and we're trying to be prompted by the Holy Spirit. And it's not about us. We pout mostly because it's about us.
Absolutely.
It's what I want. Or man, I wanted this, or I had these expectations, and they didn't materialize, and so I'm frustrated.
Yeah, when you think of who pouts the most, you tend to think of a little toddler, or 5-year-old or 4-year-old or whatever. Yeah, a lot of 40-year-olds can do the same thing.
Absolutely. Third distinctive action for godly men that they pursue is this: they seek wisdom and the gift of wise people. And I don't know about you, but when I graduated from Bible college, the amount of wisdom that I thought I knew was astounding. The stuff that I knew about life and God and the church and how to do ministry and really, I'll be honest, just most everything was really astonishing. I think you felt that way too. But then give yourself a little time and put yourself in complex situations or things beyond theories and understanding is reality sets in and gravity happens and perspective and hard times begin to beat that out of you. God desires godly men to seek wisdom from His Word and from godly people in their lives. And the Bible tells us to pursue wisdom. The book of Proverbs is soaking wet with the importance of pursuing wisdom. And there's a couple passages here. Proverbs.1:7, it says, "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction." Proverbs 3:5-8. And I could have read 70 passages from here, but Proverbs 3:5-8 says, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Do not depend on your own understanding. Seek His will in all that you do, and He will show you which path to take." And then I love this. "Don't be impressed with your own wisdom. Instead, fear the Lord and turn away from evil. Then you will have healing for your body and strength for your bones." As you think about those two, and maybe there's some other ones that stick out just about the importance of pursuing wisdom in God's Word.
Yeah, lot to be said there.
Yeah, the stakes are just so high.
I remember preaching years and years ago on parenting in Colorado. I think I had 2 kids at the time, almost 100% sure it was just the 2 older ones. They were still real little. And, it was kind of the typical almost youth pastor kind of like, hey, you guys are in charge of raising your kids. We can come alongside you. Here's the amount of time you get with your kids versus the time we get with your kids. So don't expect us to be able to accomplish more than what you can accomplish in the life of your kids, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. And a guy who was really a mentor in many ways and had planted a lot of churches and was a faithful elder out there came up to me afterwards and said, generally I don't listen to sermons from men on parenting if they haven't parented their kids through the teenage years. Yeah. And he said, "You did fine today."
Yeah.
He said, "That may be the last one you need to do for a little while, though." And it stung a little bit.
Sure.
But he encouraged me. He's like, "You did fine. You did a good job, whatever."
Right.
But he wasn't wrong, And so the value and the wisdom that can be acquired through life experience. Notice I didn't say is naturally acquired.
Right. That's right.
Like you go through the experience, but whether you want to learn from it or not is two different things. And whether you want to apply the wisdom that's available to you now through the experience is entirely up to you.
Yeah.
And so there's gaining wisdom both through study of God's word, learning from him. Who else would you rather learn from? There's wisdom that happens through your own experiences that can be a teacher. But again, up to you on whether you're going to really metabolize this and then apply it, or if you're just going to keep being a fool who bangs his head against the wall doing the same things that he's always done. And then there's this other component of older, wiser, godly men that you need to go sit down with and listen to. Now, just because someone's older doesn't mean they're wiser.
That's right.
And so there's some discernment that needs to be applied. And one of the things that I've learned over the years is that the wisest men that I've exposed myself to, number one, listen really well. They're very hesitant to be prescriptive, and they ask really good questions. And so you've experienced it, I've experienced it. Sometimes you'll sit down with a man who's older and he's not even listening. He's just waiting to talk. And he hasn't really heard the struggle that you have or the problem that you have, and he's really quick to tell you how to fix it. And that's really, at the end of the day, not super helpful a lot of times, strangely enough. But the older, wise, godly men that I respect the most are all, they say very little. They wait to be approached oftentimes. And then when you share your struggles and your questions with them, they will share their struggles and their questions right back with you. And then they'll ask you some good questions, and they'll give you very few, like, this is what you should go do. Sometimes they will.
It's almost a discovery. Just because you've been with them, you're like, man, wow, this is what I need to do. And it comes out of you. They draw that out of you to some level. And, of course, with their example and their stories. But we have two different extremes in when you and I connect with people. We sit in meetings, we do pastoral conversations, we deal with a lot of really painful, difficult, challenging things. And to be honest, some of the coolest things that we get to do is when we engage with men who are open, receptive, and hungry for wisdom, direction, instruction from God's Word and the Holy Spirit. It's so rewarding to watch men lean in and apply and write down stuff and do the hard things and own stuff and take steps and get help and move toward the unaddressed. I love feeding hungry men. Seeing that transformation in a man's life, to see a resurrected marriage or a redeemed relationship with his son or his daughter, to see a man fight against the temptations from alcohol or drugs or lust or pornography, to see a guy rise up out of a really hard season and navigate it with a lot of grace and a lot of truth is really powerful. And I'm so proud of, and I get to see that a lot. But we also run into all kinds of men.
Yeah, we do.
And different ages and different stages and in different circumstances. And often, regardless of that spectrum, regardless of how old they are or young they are, there's often a sad, frustrating theme for me as I sit on the other side of them. And they're in a bad spot, and they come in to talk about their lives and their addictions or their failing marriage or their broken family. And they don't want wisdom. Often what they just really want is validation. Hey, listen, I just want you to validate my previous and future decisions. I just want you to tell me it's okay to divorce my wife. I just want you to tell me it's okay for me to walk away from my kids. I want you to tell me it's okay. I'm battling this addiction, and I don't really want to change. And so I just want you to tell me it's going to be okay, but I don't want you to get into my life. And so I just want validation for my life, my behavior. I don't really want to change. I don't want to fight and make the necessary decisions and partner with Jesus and great resources and do the hard things with God to see things really, really dramatically change. And that's super, super frustrating. They're unwilling to listen to truth, what God says, the wisdom that He's graciously imparted us. They avoid counseling. They avoid recovery communities. They avoid getting connected with other godly men, and men, they pay for it, and the people around them pay for it. And I know that this is a similar frustration for you as well. And I know I've put the ball on the tee just right there where you can get it. But whether it's men or couples, talk about why that's so hard, and how when you can see the movie playing out in their lives and you're trying to warn them because you love them and want good for them, and yet they just keep driving. Talk about that.
Yeah, you definitely teed it up. I've had...
Hypothetically speaking.
Yeah, hypothetically.
That's right.
I've had so many experiences like that. And a lot of times it's a man who wants to deflect and blame. It's her fault. It's these kids' fault. It's my boss's fault. It's my parents' fault. It's somebody else's fault.
Yeah.
But what they're ultimately doing is avoiding responsibility. Yeah. I don't want to take responsibility for this, and I can find plenty of ways to blame and deflect, but something doesn't have to be your fault to be your responsibility. That's right. It's your life, bro.
That's right.
So do you want it to continue into chaos? Do you want it to continue to devolve into more of what you've already experienced while somehow expecting different results, which is the definition of insanity? Or do you want something better? And if you haven't reached the level of brokenness yet that you're willing to lay it all down and surrender, your level of embarrassment has not yet exceeded your level of a desire to control your circumstances.
That's a big statement right there.
All of those things, then okay, fine. Keep going, man. But just remember, I remember having a conversation years ago with a high school student who was getting ready to head off to the military, and he was 17 or 18 years old, and he just was being a fool, and that's the word that gets used in Proverbs over and over and over again. And look at it. Here's a foolish dude right here. Here's a simple, foolish young man. And he had been foolish. And I said to him, man, if you continue down this path, you'll call me one day, maybe, or someone, and you'll be in a jail cell, or you'll be somewhere that you never thought you would be because you've done things you never thought you would do in a place that you never thought you would go. And you'll remember this conversation we had. And I'm not saying that because I want to put a big "I told you so" in your ear on that day.
It's not about being...
I'm just telling you this is where the path you're on leads there. That's where it leads. And I've had so many of those conversations. I've had men that I've looked at and said, listen, if you continue in this path, you are signing yourself up for a future where your children are embittered towards you, where the wife that you have now is sitting on a front porch one day holding hands with someone else, watching your grandchildren play in the front yard. And is that what you want?
Yeah.
Do you want porn more than you want that? Do you want alcohol more than you want that? Do you want your selfishness more than you want? Just go right on down the list. And here's the crazy thing. Sometimes men will go, yeah. I do. So can I go ahead and leave? And they do.
Yeah.
And that is a brutal moment. And I've had plenty of men look at me and say, look, man, I know all the things you're going to say. I know all the things you're going to pull.
And it's so frustrating.
It's so frustrating. Because man, if you knew, then why are we even here? But really what that indicates is that you've got a man who's literally closed off his heart, and he said, I want what I want, and I'm going to go get it, and I'm willing to sacrifice anyone and everything for it. And most of the time it's really short-term, quote-unquote, gain, short-term pleasure, short-term fill in the blank, and sacrificing just everything downstream from everything. And there's a reason the book of Proverbs talks about these decisions in such dire ways. It's literally painted as life and death. There's this young man, is pictured in the book of Proverbs. Another person sees him. He's heading down a road, and it's a road to, quote, her house. It's where a prostitute lives. And why else would this guy be heading down that road unless that's what he wants to do and that's who he wants to be tempted by? And the way it's painted is like he's like a prey animal who's about to get slaughtered. And the reality is it's not just you that gets slaughtered. No. It's everyone and everything that matters most to you that ends up being a casualty as well. And so I don't know what got us there.
No, this is exactly what we're talking about. It's just going, man, we have wisdom available to us in His Word. through His Holy Spirit, and through godly people, and specifically for men, it's putting yourself around other men too. That's why this is so critical for us. And it's like this Proverbs 13:20. It says, "Walk with the wise," and here's the promise: you'll become wise. And here's the other promise: for a companion of fools suffers harm.
Yeah.
And who you put yourself around, who you're willing to actually get honest with somebody about, or you're just going to live in the trivial, and we'll talk about the Cats lost or the Cats win or what's going on or the weather or whatever. But when you put yourself around wise people and you heed their advice, because none of us have it all figured out. None of us have arrived. Some of us are better in certain areas than others. And I need the wisdom from you, and you need wisdom from me. And so putting ourselves in the situations, man, it's a game changer for us. And again, older, wiser. Again, older doesn't always mean older in age,
wiser,
but it means older spiritually.
Further ahead,
yeah. And so having those people in our lives are super important. That's why I just keep hammering this nail of groups, and why you've got to be in groups, and why you need accountability, and why you've got to be in God's Word, and why this matters, because the stakes are so high, and you don't want to be in a place where you look, these conversations that we're having with people, and you're going, hey, all of this sits on the table. And if you don't change, it all goes away. And that stuff that goes away is all damaged and broken and bloody. And then they get to try to find help and refuge from your wake.
Yeah. Another airport story, you see such, a sampling of the world we live in when you're in an airport, especially the bigger ones. It's waiting for a plane, and there's a group of kind of probably 20-somethings that had apparently all traveled from different parts of the country in for something related to their work. And they all just looked terrible because they were so hungover, and they're going on and on about how they'd stayed out till 4 the night before and 3 the day before that. And they're talking about who they hooked up with and all this kind of thing. Yeah. Then I'm kind of looking around at them, and I didn't see any wedding bands on anyone's fingers. Right. But at some point, one of those people in that crew might get married, and they might think to themselves, well, now everything's changed.
Yeah.
Now I'm married, and everything will be different, and I'll go on the road with this same crew. And
what happened then?
They'll act like fools, but I won't act like a fool anymore. And what changed about you? Yeah, that makes you think that just because you got married, you won't be a fool anymore. You're just a fool who got married. That's all you are. So stop being a fool. And then get married. You know, and if you're a fool who got married, fix the fool part fast.
Yeah, that's right.
Fast, because it'll fall out. Because inevitably what will happen is one of them, they'll get married, they'll think everything's changed, and then they'll end up at a bar at 2 o'clock in the morning, and they'll go, wow, how did I end up sleeping with that stranger? Yeah. And now I'm married and I've committed adultery. Well, that's because that's who you already were.
Yeah. Baby steps, concessions, justifications, bad decisions.
Remember this, it's one of the very few illustrations I've ever stolen but given credit to. Andy Stanley, used this illustration years ago with, he called it, I think, Mr. and Mrs. Mug, and I've used it, seen other people use it, but he talks about these two people, they fall in love, they get together, blah, 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 and there's all these little beads in these mugs, and he's like, and then all of a sudden they have this conflict, and then he smashes the mugs together, and all these beads come out, and then this argument happens, that happens, and then blah, 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 and there's all these beads flying around everywhere, and then his very simple point is, at some point, she looks at him and goes, why'd that come out of you? And he looks at her and goes, why'd that come out of you? And why'd you do that? And why'd you say that? And what's going on with you? And he picks up the little bead and goes, now here, follow me here. The reason this came out of there when this happened is because that is what was in there. It's like, and that's Jesus, out of the overflow of the heart, the mouth speaks. The stuff that comes out of us, the things we say and the things we do are indicative of what's going on inside of us. Yeah. And so if we don't address the inside, clean the inside of the cup, what's on the outside inevitably will reveal who we really are.
Yeah, yeah. We beat that drum. It's awesome. Last one, and it really moves toward this. It's even better than I thought, but it moves toward this last action of godly men. Godly men move toward the mess, and they do hard things. Yeah. This is distinctive, and it can be summed up in a word: intentionality. Mm-hmm. And men are either intentional or they're passive, or wayward or stubborn or whatever. But kind of these two categories. I'll hammer passivity for a second. You just jump in if you want to say anything. But passivity is a refusal to engage in matters that demand our attention. Mm-hmm. It's a mindset of putting off the inevitable, hoping that it won't be inevitable, but it always is. The posture of passivity is to lean back, lean away from, and let something that needs to be addressed go unaddressed. Another word for passivity is neglect. We neglect our own heart. We neglect our own story. We neglect our own relationships, marriage, whatever, our finances, our mental health. We neglect the promptings of the Holy Spirit, and we neglect God's word. We choose to be disobedient, and that's problematic for men. It's kryptonite for men. We saw that first in Adam in Genesis 3, where sin entered the world. It's happening still, and the fallout is great. And passivity can sit deep in the hearts of men. And we have to pay attention to it and dig it out because we have to eradicate it because there's a reason that there's something in that's unaddressed that we want to stay unaddressed. And the enemy loves that. He wants men passive. He wants that because if that can take place, if there's areas in their lives that go unaddressed, it can fester, rot, decompose, and lead to death. And so anything you want to say about passivity?
Yeah, the words responsive versus reactive come to mind as well. So sometimes things blow up. You didn't see them coming. Whether you should or shouldn't have is a different question. But it blows up, and you're sitting there in front of your high school age son or daughter, or you're sitting there with your wife or whoever it is, and you can react out of that emotion or anger or whatever that is, and say and do a lot of things that you shouldn't say and do, or you can be responsive.
Yeah.
And one of the ways that you can be responsive is by getting really reflective.
Yeah.
Going, okay, what can I own here?
Yeah.
What can I take responsibility for?
What's my part?
What's my role? Do I need to apologize for something? Does this child in front of me need grace from me right now or truth from me right now?
Yeah.
So there's a lot of thinking and praying that needs to be done in the moment, responsive.
Yeah.
The other thing that comes to mind is going, that, and you hit on this to a certain degree, the thing that leads to passivity for me probably the most is just being tired.
Yeah.
So, man, I know I need to talk to that child about this. I know I need to address this in my life or in my marriage or whatever that may be. And I'm just going, but not tonight.
Yeah.
But not right now.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's the right answer.
Yeah, that's right.
But if it's always the answer, like it wasn't yesterday, it wasn't tonight, it's not going to be tomorrow, it's not going to be, then it's never going to be. And so be mindful and careful that we're not always using our exhaustion as an excuse to leave things unaddressed, because what might take you 10 minutes to address tonight, if you keep letting it go, will take you 10 counseling sessions to address.
That's good.
So
it's really good.
But I get it, man.
Yeah.
I'm tired. Do I really want to walk into that child's room at 10:30 at night when I'm ready to go to bed and know that it might be 12:30 before we're done? Or do I just want to go, I'll get to it when I get to it?
I have a weird analogy for this, and I don't know if I told you this story or not, but a couple of years ago, and this is a simple analogy, but it's so true. Our ice machine went out on our refrigerator. And we're big ice people. We love ice. Okay. Unlike Weiss, who doesn't put any ice in his drinks because
he lived in a lot of things go back to he lived in Haiti. Man. That's right. There was no ice in Haiti.
That's right. So what do I do when it goes out? I'd love a Coke Zero or a glass of ice water, and so I'm going to go get some ice. So I swing by Kroger, get a bag of ice, and then for the next 6 months, I kept buying bags and
stock in Home City ice
of ice, and I'm sure we had stuff going on. I have no doubt. But what I should have done is just Googled, find an ice fixer, find a guy, have him come in and fix the ice so that we can have our own ice, And I remember finally calling someone, and he fixed it. It was probably $240.
Yeah. Or ice trays. Those things exist, right?
Man, don't you hate those things, though? Especially when your wife doesn't fill them back up and you go in and there's one ice tray. It's like, oh, cool. Hero.
I'm not a big ice guy, so I don't. Yeah. So I sit in ice. I don't put it in my. You're about to start.
But I think, I'm looking back reflecting on 6 months of buying. I mean, how many bags of ice did I buy? You know? And I'm sure I spent hundreds of dollars in frozen water. But there's a couple dumb things from this parable that I find in myself. I put something off that needed to be addressed, first thing. I compensated by buying ice instead of fixing the problem. I delayed fixing a problem that created unnecessary runs to the store to buy more bags and more bags and more bags of ice. And I paid more in the long run by not addressing the problem when I could have just addressed it in that moment. And by the way, that's not the only area in my life, that I'm trying to address and not neglect. I don't want to be passive in any area, but the reality is we have to constantly root out passivity in our lives. But man, it's one thing to be passive about a broken ice machine. It's quite another thing to be passive in a struggling marriage.
Yeah.
Or passive in areas where our kids are struggling, or where we've got these old habits that exist, or old patterns that are front and center, or addictions that have sit in our lives. And so intentionality is about this desire to build something, nurture something, invest in something with a lot of purpose and a plan.
Yeah.
It's big. It's a big part of who God calls us as men to be, and that's part of provision and protection. It always requires great intention from us, and intentionality is like this muscle that, again, you were talking about putting more weight on. The more weight you put on yourself, the stronger you get, and then the more you want to do. It just permeates you with intention your entire life and in every relationship. And we know deep down that things don't change without intention. Nothing drifts toward anything good. It requires ownership and engagement and living by faith, and it's doing the hard things, moving toward the mess. And so what else, as you think about this, just adding to the power of following Jesus and being intentional toward the mess and doing the hard things, what else comes to mind?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a reason why when someone like Jordan Peterson comes along and he writes something like 12 Rules for Life, and one of them is clean your room.
Yeah.
There's power in that because of what you just talked about, going things devolve into chaos. They don't evolve into order.
Yeah.
So
right.
if you just take an average person who's sitting in their, squalor of an apartment, and go, and I've heard Jordan Peterson talk about this, like, don't even start with the whole apartment. Just go clean the table.
Yeah.
And then tomorrow clean the table and the desk, and then the table and the desk, and then the countertops, and then the living room, and what you'll find is that as you do that, as you move toward the mess, you'll actually be motivated even more than you ever thought you would be to now address other areas of your living space. Well, the same is true for your life. So if let's say that you're going, hey, I just don't read the Bible at all.
Yeah.
Far too many people start off going, well, okay, so I'm going to read the Bible in a year. And then they get to Leviticus and they're like, you know what? I'm just done. It's Valentine's Day and, or whatever it is. And what if you just said, no, I'm just going to spend 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Each morning, I'm going to read a proverb.
Yeah.
And I'm going to think about that proverb for a couple minutes after I'm done reading it. I'm going to pray, God, help me to put this in practice in my life.
Yeah.
Then I move on. If you do that, if you string that together, that discipline will grow. But far too often what happens is people try it for, 3 weeks or 2 days or whatever it is, and then they just quit, and then it devolves back into chaos again. And so I think many of the things that play out in our physical lives are also true in our marriages, in our parenting, in our every area of our life. If we will move toward the thing that's out of order, it's in chaos, and try to put it in order. If you'll do that with the small things, again, it doesn't take as much time. If you allow yourself to get so out of shape that, 3 years down the road, when you decide to get in shape again, it's going to be a brutal, painful experience. That's different than going, well, I missed a couple days, but I'm going to be right back in the gym. And, I might feel a little off for a day, but I'll fall right back into the rhythm. I'm going to put that area of my life back into order.
Yeah.
That discipline will pay off. So in your marriage, if you develop a discipline of going, hey, how can I pray for you?
Yeah.
Hopefully what comes back to you is a little bit the same of what you heard last week and a little bit of what you heard 2 weeks ago, and maybe one new thing that she's thinking about and praying about or whatever, and you go, okay. Versus if you just ask for the first time in 5 years, and you go, well, let me see where I should even begin. That's going to be a big, long laundry list if she wants to give it to you. So small messes don't take as much time to clean up as big messes do, but if you got a big mess, go start in small areas and keep working your way around.
Just starting small, even asking just good questions. Hey, babe, where am I winning? How can I do better? What do you need more from me? What do you need less from me? Sometimes that's a good question. It's a hard question. You know what I need? Less of your mouth.
That's right.
Less of your attitude.
That's right. Less of those eyebrows.
Pouting. That's right.
Less of that pouting.
That's right. But But it's one of those things where when we even just asking ourselves, hey, what's some hard things I need to do today? And I don't know what that is. It could be working out. It could be I need to have this conversation. Or I remember a friend of mine that's in Kansas City. He put their debt on this right when they walk into their garage. From their garage into their door, it was on the wall there. They put their debt, and so every month they get to scratch it down. And I mean, and it was a big debt, man. I mean, it was like he's writing. He has to bend down, and finally they accomplished that. But it's one of those things where when you can see, you go, this is the plan I need to operate out of, or this is the thing that I need to attack. And again, when you get out of debt, you start small, and you've got to make some sacrifices. You got to make some decisions, and so in doing so, you begin to see progress, and that progress can encourage you to continue to go, just like cleaning the table and then moving toward these other areas of your life.
It taps into something that's just deep and true about men. When we look at the original mandate that God gives to Adam, he's to care for and cultivate this garden. He's going to have to work it, and he's going to see progress as he tends it. But he's got to put work into it, and the work that he puts into it will be returned back to him. And men are just naturally attracted to that kind of effort and response. And now I see the progress that's helpful, so that when we take domain, when we exercise our dominion over, the things that God's entrusted to us that ultimately belong to him, and we're faithful with those things, and we see that, okay, that progress, okay, that's moving in the right direction.
There's fruit from our taking responsibility and being obedient and doing the hard things. I mean, you said this earlier too. It's we both say this a lot. It may not be your fault, but it is your responsibility, and it doesn't matter whether you're just looking at the pace or the pulse or the direction of your home, or looking in the mirror and going, man, I need to step back from whatever that looks like. It's just going, hey, what are some things right now that are messy that I need to move toward? And what are some hard things that's God's requiring me of? And let me move toward that with a lot of humility. We have to come in, guns blazing. We're going to do this. It's like we're not turning over tables, but going, hey, and sometimes even in marriages, I'll have guys say, hey, listen, because she's battling depression or she's got this going on. It's like, hey, when you begin with, hey, I'm concerned for us. This is a we thing, and man, I want to come around this to see how I can help and how we can get better. It's a game changer. Instead of going, hey, this is all your fault. We're here because of you. It's like, no, how can we address this thing that's going unaddressed? I asked this question in Fight Club. I'll say, hey, what's the, almost like metaphorically, if there's a pile of horse poop in your house, you smell it at first, and it's ripe. But eventually, you just hang out in it. You stop noticing it
until someone comes over.
And you walk around it, And so it's like, what is the area in your life that's gone unaddressed? And man, ask. And if you don't know what that is,
ask somebody.
Ask somebody, or ask the Lord, and He'll reveal it to you.
What do you see? What do you see in me that needs to be addressed?
Yeah.
We never want to be that guy who walks around where everybody's going, that thing needs to be addressed in his life, and nobody's willing to say it to him. Yeah. But if you'll go ask, then you don't have to worry about being that guy. If it's just consistently like, hey, anything you see I need to address, I like to ask guys around here, anything you see I need to address, anything you need me to do differently, anything you need me to change or look at, that way, like, there's hopefully no surprises if people are willing to be honest with you.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, these are our 4 areas, and I'll say this before I close up. If you want to do a deeper dive just around passivity, you can look at a previous episode in Locker Room. It was last season. It was called Eradicate Passivity. It's November 24th, 23. So a lot of other things we could talk about the distinctive actions of godly men, but these are the 4 that we talked about today. Be consumed with the gospel and remind yourself of God's rescue story in your life. Put away childish ways in childhood. Seek wisdom and the gift of godly wisdom and godly counsel from people. Move toward the mess and do hard things.
Yep.
Thanks for jumping on, man. Anything else?
No, I'm good.
Right on. All right. This podcast has encouraged you. I'd love to hear from you if you're wrestling with Christianity, would like more information about becoming a Christ follower, or, man, you just feel stuck. You're trying to figure out what your next step is. Shoot us an email at lockerroom@southland.church. As always, if this podcast has encouraged you, share it with a friend. Let's get after it. Fight for the most important things. We'll catch you next time on Locker Room.